morticing sled. It's quite simple, and I'll show first how to use it and then a few tips on how to make it. And the first thing I want to do is set the height of the bit to be 0, not at the surface here, but at the surface here. So I've got it so it's just barely touching there. Then I can 0 the Wixie, and all my references will be from this point. Next thing is I want to control the travel of the sled. So I've got a scrap of wood that happens to be 1 inch wide. I've got one stop already in place, and I'll add a second stop. Then when I remove the scrap of wood, I've got exactly 1 inch of travel. Now the bit I'm using is a 3/8 diameter router bit, so that means it'll make a mortise, the 1 inch of travel plus the diameter bit, 1 3/8 inch long. And it's helpful to use spiral router bits that are, I guess they're called an up spiral, but the router's upside down, so it's actually going to force the wood down as it's cut. And also that can cut on the end. Then set the fence by loosening these screws. And I want to set the fence parallel to this edge, as well as an appropriate distance that will position the mortise at the right spot in the piece of wood. So for that, it's handy to have, again, a scrap of wood of the right thickness. And then I can slide that along and just with my fingers make sure I've got an equal distance. Next thing is how close do I want the mortise to come to the end of the piece. And I put a stop on here which allows the sled to come so there's 1 inch of distance between the block and the edge of the router bit. So if I clamp my scrap on here, I'm now ready to cut a mortise of 1 3/8 inch length with the distance in from the edge that was set with the fence and with the distance from the end set with this stop. So I'm raising the bit while moving the sled back and forth while keeping an eye on the Wixie because I want my mortise to be 3/4 of an inch deep. Okay, so now I can look at the piece. I can see it's exactly 3/4 of an inch. It's 1 inch from the end, and it's whatever distance I chose offset. And if anything is wrong with that, then I can just make the adjustments here, set another side down, and repeat the test till I get it perfect. And now the real power of this sled comes into play because I can take a piece, push it up against the same stop block, clamp it in place, and without any measurements or checking, I know I'm going to get an exact replica of that mortise. Since the stops are on the sled, I don't need a stop way out here the way you normally might in order to control the limit. If I want the mortise to be on an angle, which you would if you wanted the legs of a table to be splayed out, then I could mount this fence on an angle or put in a wedge. And if I had a curved leg that I wanted to mortise, I could make a custom piece here, unscrew this piece and screw on a custom curved piece that would accept that. I ripped the runner on the table saw to a width that will slide with a little bit of force but not have any play in it. And I've chosen a piece of wood with straight grain and with the growth rings running vertically, and that will give less shrinkage in the width here with changes in humidity. I'll post a link below showing how to set the table saw fence to cut that kind of accurate width. I'm putting these Rampa threaded inserts into the bottom of the base and a handy tool to put them in so it screws in here. And it's important for them to go in straight, so I made my own little tool and a reminder that it's a 7/16 hole. So that goes in there, keeps it straight, and then I just find the hole, hold the block down, give it a few turns, and I don't go all the way in with this because otherwise it gets too tight and unscrews the thing. Finish off with a 6mm hex wrench. And I found I don't need any countersinking. It'll just push into the wood that little lip, and I want to get it definitely below so it's not scratching on the cast iron table. And there's the top side. I've got some shims in here so that my runner will be just 1/1000 of an inch above the table, something like that. And I've got a guide on the edge here clamped on so that I can drop that on there and have it squared lined up. I'll apply packing tape and then cut away the part that goes over the wood. And my goal here is to stop any glue that might squeeze out from coming in contact with the cast iron. I'm just putting kind of the minimum amount of glue on that I think I can get away with, because I don't want it squeezing out all over the place. So now this can go on, and then I'll just use a weight to apply pressure for the glue to dry. And I'm checking that I'm still lined up with this guide here. This slides pretty nicely and has absolutely no wiggle in it. I've purposely made this base a little deeper, and that's so that I can run the board along and trim this edge to be perfectly parallel with the miter slot. And that'll give me a reference edge for positioning the pieces of material to be mortised. I'm tightening down these brackets before I attach the fence so that they'll be lined up with the slots. And I've pushed both brackets to the left so that they'll be spaced properly. With this arrangement, I can go from essentially 0 to 1.5 inches. So that would allow me to put a 1/2 inch mortise in the center of a 3.5 inch post. Probably the biggest I'd ever go. If I ever need to go larger, I can rotate this plate 180 degrees as I've done so that the adjustments are on the far side. Then put these bolts into the other set of Rampa inserts. And then I have a range from 1.25 inch to 2 3/4 inch. And that was the reason for 4 inserts here. Those inserts are spaced at 1.25 inch pitch, and the slots allow 1.5 inch of movement. As this base is 3/4 inch thick, I lose 3/4 inch out of the maximum depth of mortise I could cut. So what I did is I routed a cove in the bottom of the base so that the collet of the router can actually come above the table and still spin freely. So then I'm only losing less than 3/8 inch out of the maximum depth of cut. I've cut a slot here so the sled can move back and forth without having to take the handle out. And if I ever need it longer, I could just extend it to another one of these holes. This router table stand was made with all mortise and tenon joints, and the mortices were cut with the sled. I'll put a link below to a jig that runs on the table saw and is very nice for cutting the tenons, and that's what I used to cut all the tenons in this frame.